top of the ladder, Flight Instructor, ATP, type ratings, and the real training roadmap. Hello, yet again. This is Forrest Owens. I'm an aviation lawyer, a private pilot, and an FAA licensed airframe and power plant mechanic. Finally, let's discuss the top of the ladder, because this is where the FAA's pilot training framework becomes unmistakably professional. Let's start with the Flight Instructor Certificate. A great many pilots think of flight instructing as something you do only to build time. The FAA does not see it that way. Under Subpart H, the Flight Instructor Certificate is its own professional credential. 14 C.F.R. Section 61.183 establishes eligibility requirements. Section 61.185 prescribes the aeronautical knowledge areas. Section 61.187 addresses flight proficiency. And Section 61.195 imposes meaningful limitations on what an instructor may endorse or teach. That last point matters. The FAA regulates instructors not just because they teach, but because they are the gatekeepers. They authorize solos, they authorize practical tests, they create the logbook endorsements that unlock the next certificate or rating. In a very real sense, the FAA outsources part of the certification judgment to instructors, then regulates those instructors accordingly. Consider a practical example. When a flight instructor signs a student for the first solo or endorsement, a private pilot applicant for that first practical test, the signature is not ceremonial. It is a regulatory act. It tells the FAA the instructor has reviewed the required knowledge, observed the required proficiency, and believes the applicant meets the legal standard to proceed. That is why sloppy endorsements and weak documentation cause so much trouble. In FAA training, paperwork is not separate from competence. It is part of competence. Now, move to the top certificate, Airline Transport Pilot, or ATP. Under Section 61.153 through 61.159, the ATP applicant generally must be at least 23 years old for an unrestricted ATP. Read, speak, write, and understand English, hold a commercial pilot certificate and instrument rating, pass the ATP knowledge and practical tests, and satisfy the substantial aeronautical experience requirements for ATP under Section 61.159, which generally requires 1,500 hours of total time, including specific amounts of cross-country, night instrument, and pilot and command time. There is also the restricted ATP pathway in Section 61.160, which in certain circumstances allows an applicant to qualify at a lower total time threshold, such as military and qualifying academic programs. That is why the phrase 1,500 hours is generally correct, but not universally complete. There is another major ATP gate, the ATP Certification Training Program. For multi-engine aircraft ATP applicants, Section 61.156 requires a graduation certificate from an authorized training provider before the applicant may even take the ATP knowledge test. The regulation requires academic training and simulator training, including high-altitude aerodynamics, meteorology, air carrier operations, stall prevention and recovery, upset training, and professionalism. The FAA's message is obvious. Before issuing the highest pilot certificate, the agency wants training that looks less like individual flight lessons and more like systems level transport category preparation. And then there's the issue of type ratings. Under Section 61.31, a pilot needs a type rating to serve as pilot in command of a large aircraft, turbojet-powered airplane, or other aircraft when the administrator requires it through type certification procedures. This is critically important for anyone looking at business aviation or airline operations. A commercial certificate with multi-engine privileges does not by itself authorize command of a Gulfstream, Challenger, Falcon, or Boeing. The pilot must complete make and model specific type training and pass the associated practical test. This is why advanced pilot training becomes increasingly aircraft specific as the aircraft becomes more complex. So, what does the real FAA training roadmap look like in practice? For many pilots, it is student certification, private pilot, instrument rating, commercial pilot, multi-engine rating, flight instructor, and perhaps instrument instructor. Then ATP or one or more type ratings. But the crucial point is that this is not a social custom. It is a regulatory staircase, and each step exists because the FAA has decided that the next level of authority requires a deeper level of proven competence. I would also make one final cautionary point. Minimums are legal minimums. They are not promises of readiness. A private pilot with 40 hours may be legal and still need more training to be truly confident. A commercial pilot at 250 hours may be legal and still they may be immature in judgment. An ATP candidate with 1,500 hours may satisfy the hour requirement and still needs substantial polishing in turbine procedures and crew discipline. The FAA tells you what is necessary for certification. It does not tell you what is sufficient for excellence. So the cleanest way to understand the entire structure is this. The FAA certifies increasing responsibility, not merely increasing time. Student training proves supervised readiness. Private proves command. Instrument proves precision. Commercial proves compensated operational competence. Instructor proves gatekeeping competence. ATP proves transport level professionalism. And type ratings prove aircraft specific mastery. Here's something to take away. In FAA pilot training, every new certificate or rating is really a new grant of legal trust. The higher you climb, the more exacting that trust becomes. Thank you very much for your interest in this topic. This information is provided for informational purposes only and is not legal advice. If you have any questions, please direct them to admin@aviationlegalcounsel.com. We look forward to helping you navigate these questions and issues with precision.